The camera was rolling. The lights beamed cold and bright across MSNBC's set. America was watching. The segment was about national defense and election integrity. But what happened next would rupture more than just the conversation. "Congressman Bacon," the host asked with caution, "where do you stand on Trump's claim that the military and intelligence community are working against him?" Don Bacon exhaled slowly. His eyes flicked briefly off camera, then returned. "I'm done lying," he said, and the entire studio fell silent. Then came the dagger. Donald Trump is a danger to democracy and a disgrace to the GOP. Even the cameraman gasped. The host froze. Panelists blinked in shock. Within seconds, the internet detonated. Don Bacon exploded across Twitter. Fox News called it mutiny. CNN called it a reckoning. But behind the scenes, something deeper stirred. At that very moment, in a quiet office in Florida, Donald Trump sat alone watching the clip. He didn't flinch, didn't yell. He just leaned forward, reached into his drawer, and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. He whispered two chilling words: "Let's begin." 3 days later, Trump's campaign rally in Michigan was already historic before it began. Lines stretched for blocks. Chants echoed like a battle cry. "USA, USA!" News vans swarmed the parking lot. And deep inside a bulletproof tent, Trump rehearsed one line over and over again, staring at the envelope in his hand like it held fire. Inside that manila folder were secrets. By the time Trump took the stage, it was dusk. He was loud, angry, sweating patriotism and vengeance. He blasted the media, the Democrats, rhinos, the deep state. And then he stopped. His face turned calm. "I wasn't going to say this," he said, "but if Don Bacon wants to play hero, he should tell America about Operation Patriot Loop and who paid for it." He raised the envelope and paused. You could hear a pin drop. "This," he said slowly, "is the receipt of betrayal." Then he dropped the bomb. Don Bacon received $3.4 million from a military lobbying group in exchange for killing a veterans' benefits bill behind closed doors. The crowd gasped, screams, tears. Phones went up. The internet shattered. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., Don Bacon collapsed into a leather chair, his hands trembling. Within hours, the media lost control. MSNBC cut to commercial. Fox News demanded proof. Twitter was bleeding hashtags. Trump exposes Bacon, her veterans betrayed GOP civil war. But on a dark encrypted forum, a 46-second audio file leaked, and within minutes it hit Telegram and Reddit. It was a conversation, grainy but clear. "You'll get the money, Don. Just make sure the bill dies in committee. Our clients don't want this kind of spending." "Understood. No press, no paper trail." Don Bacon's voice. "Verified." The cries from veterans across America were immediate. A retired sergeant from Ohio posted a video, holding his denied medical letter, tears flooding his eyes. "I voted for you, Don. While I begged for my benefits, you were trading our lives for lobbyist cash." On Capitol Hill, Bacon canceled all media interviews. His office blinds remained shut. No staffers seen entering or leaving. Then came reports. He was seen leaving Congress through a back entrance, visibly shaken, refusing to speak. America had witnessed political assassination, not with bullets, but with one deadly sentence in a manila envelope. And far away, watching quietly in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré shook his head. "So this is what America hides under democracy," he whispered to his aide. "Begin the letter. It's time the world sees the real face." 2 days after the rally, the tape still burned through every screen. On the Morning Truth, a quiet, middle-aged woman was invited to speak. Her name was Helen Garner, mother of a Marine who died in 2021 after being denied advanced trauma care. Her voice was gentle, her eyes distant. I believed in Congressman Bacon, she said, holding a photo of her son. He looked me in the eyes and said he would fight for military families. Then she held up a folded letter, the same one she'd carried for 3 years. A benefits rejection, stamped closed case. I begged his office for help. I sat outside his office for 6 hours with my son's ashes in a jar. And now I find out. She couldn't finish the sentence. The host placed a hand on her shoulder, and Helen finally broke. She wept, not quietly, but with the kind of grief that silences a room. And across America, thousands wept with her. That night, Helen trended in 5 countries. Even Ibrahim Traoré tweeted one word: unforgivable. The GOP wasn't just in crisis now, it was collapsing. And Trump had only just begun. Inside a high-security vault in Omaha, a document went missing. It wasn't supposed to exist anymore, but someone, a low-level Senate aide named Marcus Hill, had seen it before. It was titled Directive 12A, Defense Lobby Communication Protocol, marked confidential, signed by several congressmen, including Don Bacon. Marcus, scared and broke, tried to stay silent, but when he saw Helen's interview, something inside him shattered. He leaked a redacted version to a small veteran advocacy group. By noon, it was on every major outlet. The document showed patterns: phone calls, undisclosed meetings, payments disguised as consulting fees. One paragraph stood out: ensure communication remains untraceable and verbal only. No public commitment to benefit expansions until after the vote cycle. Don Bacon's signature was at the bottom. The nation erupted. A Vietnam veteran in California live-streamed as he burned his Republican voter card. Dozens of former soldiers chained themselves outside Bacon's Nebraska office. Gold Star families began organizing a silent march on Capitol Hill. The document was real. And now, Bacon's silence wasn't just guilt. It was betrayal, written in ink. Far from the chaos in a quiet, sun-drenched office in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré took a deep breath. He had just finished reading a translated copy of Helen Garner's speech. He stood still, looking out over the dusty courtyard, then turned to his chief advisor. "America sells war as peace," he said. "But its sons die in silence." His aide nodded solemnly. "I want to talk to their veterans," Traoré said suddenly. "Find Helen. Invite her here, not for show, for truth." Within 48 hours, Helen received an email marked Presidency of Burkina Faso. At first, she thought it was a scam, but then came a call, clear, respectful, real. "Ibrahim Traoré would like to personally speak with you," the woman said. "Not as a politician, as a son." Helen stared at her late son's photo, and for the first time in weeks, her voice didn't tremble. "I'll come," she whispered. When the media found out, they erupted again. Why was Africa's youngest president inviting an American mother? But Traoré didn't care about the noise. He cared about the story. Because sometimes the truth of a nation is told, not by its leaders, but by its wounded. They came without drums, without slogans, just silence. One by one, in the early morning light, 236 families, veterans, widows, mothers, placed empty chairs in front of the Capitol steps. Each chair held a photo. Some had medals, others folded flags, and one had a teddy bear. This was the March of Empty Chairs, organized by the same group that leaked Directive 12A. It wasn't a protest. It was a funeral for trust. As the press surrounded them, no one spoke. Until a little girl, maybe 8 or 9, sat beside her father's chair and held up a drawing. A soldier, a heart, the word "why." That photo went viral within minutes. Inside the Capitol, several GOP members locked themselves in private meetings. Some avoided eye contact in the halls. Others made phone calls in hushed tones. But Don Bacon? Still no statement. Still no appearance. "Where is he?" a journalist shouted. No answer, just silence. Until one broken, tired Capitol janitor whispered under his breath, "He ain't hiding from reporters, he's hiding from ghosts." And far away, in a hotel in Ouagadougou, Helen Garner unpacked her son's photo and began to cry. The presidential palace in Ouagadougou wasn't golden or grand, just clean, open and warm. Helen was escorted through a quiet hallway into a sunlit courtyard. There, standing tall in his olive-green fatigues, was President Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't reach for a handshake. He stepped forward and hugged her, not for the cameras, not for politics, for a mother who carried a wound the world ignored. "I'm not here as a president," Traoré said gently. "I'm here as a son who knows what it means to lose to injustice." Helen broke down in his arms. They sat under a neem tree for over an hour. No cameras, no script, just conversation. She spoke of her boy, how he enlisted straight out of high school, how he wrote poems in his notebook, how she still texted his number sometimes, pretending he'd reply. And Traoré listened, really listened. Then he said something that shook her. If a nation forgets the blood of its children, it no longer deserves to lead the world. Later that night, the photo leaked, Helen and Traoré, seated together, eyes full of tears. America saw it, and something shifted. For the first time, they questioned who was truly presidential. It was 3:41 a.m., Washington time. Don Bacon sat alone in a dim apartment across the river. The TV was on mute. Headlines flashed across the screen. Helen meets Traoré. Empty chair protests sparks investigation. Bacon must resign hit 6 million tweets. His phone rang. He stared at it. The number was blocked. After 5 rings, he answered. "Don," the voice said, low and gravelly. "You weren't supposed to let it get this far." Silence. "You know what happens if the other files leak. You're not the only one who signed." Bacon's hand trembled. I didn't think she'd go to Africa," he whispered. "Doesn't matter now. We can't afford a martyr. Handle it." Click. He stared at the screen. Then at the envelope still clutched in his drawer. Another one. One no one knew about. Inside it, a list of 7 names, all GOP, all tied to the same scheme. He stood up, looked in the mirror, and didn't recognize the man staring back. And in that moment, for the first time, he realized he was no longer hiding from Donald Trump. He was hiding from truth itself. The paper was yellowed. The handwriting, rushed, angry. 7 names, all tied to the Directive 12A military lobbying scheme. Senators, representatives, 2 former Pentagon advisors. At the top, Don Bacon. He stared at the list for hours. By now, the media had turned brutal. Reporters waited outside his apartment. Protesters shouted his name from below. He hadn't spoken in days, but the guilt had become unbearable. He picked up the list and slipped it into an envelope. Scribbled on it, "If I disappear, this goes to the press." Then he called an old friend, not a politician, not a lawyer, just a man he trusted, a retired Marine named Kurt. "Kurt," he whispered, "if something happens to me, don't let this list die." Kurt didn't ask questions, just said, "Semper Fi." That night, Don Bacon drank half a bottle of whiskey, wrote a letter to Helen Garner, and folded it beside a campaign photo of himself smiling. He looked at the smiling man in the photo and whispered, "You betrayed everyone who believed in that smile." And then, he cried like a man who had nothing left to hide. It happened at 9:12 a.m. CNN's top anchor interrupted a live broadcast. "We've just received documents, verified, linking 7 U.S. officials to a hidden campaign of military lobbying corruption tied to veteran aid cuts." The screen lit up with names and photos. One senator fainted during a meeting. Another fled his office through a service tunnel. It was chaos. News helicopters buzzed over the Capitol. Protesters lit up the streets. A military widow from Texas collapsed in front of the Senate gates, screaming, "My husband died for this?" Within an hour, the Justice Department announced a probe. 3 committee chairs resigned. But the most shocking moment came when Kurt, the retired Marine, stepped in front of live cameras and said, "Don Bacon gave me this list, not for revenge, for redemption." And the media erupted again. America was no longer guessing. Now they knew. And in the midst of it all, a fragile voice broke through the noise. The announcement everyone waited for. Helen Garner will speak at the Lincoln Memorial this Friday at sunset. The world turned its eyes to Washington. And Ibrahim Traoré? He quietly booked a seat on the next flight to the U.S. Thousands gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. No stage, no fireworks, just one podium and one grieving mother. Helen Garner stepped up in silence. Her hands shook slightly as she placed her son's photo down beside her. "I never wanted a microphone," she began. "I just wanted to hear my son's voice again." The crowd was silent, the air still. When he died, I told myself it was for something greater, that our country, the one I raised him to believe in, would honor his sacrifice. She paused. Her voice cracked. "But this week, I learned the truth. He didn't die for freedom. He died for a deal, for money." Gasps, tears. A veteran in uniform dropped to his knees. Helen held up her son's dog tags. "Congressman Bacon, if you're listening, this isn't political anymore. This is personal. You didn't just betray America. You betrayed me." She looked out over the crowd, eyes red and fierce. "And to the mothers watching tonight, never stop asking questions. Never stop demanding answers, because our sons are not for sale." She stepped back, tears streaking her cheeks, and in the very front row, unnoticed until now, Ibrahim Traoré stood up and began to clap, and the whole crowd followed. It was supposed to be a routine Senate oversight hearing, but what happened inside that hearing room would stop the heart of the nation. Cameras were rolling, press crowded every corner, whispers filled the air. Ibrahim Traoré, now officially visiting the U.S. as an invited observer, sat quietly in the second row, watching. Suddenly the doors burst open. Don Bacon entered, unannounced, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking, but carrying a folder. The room froze. "I need to speak," he said. The chairman hesitated, but the world was already watching. He nodded. Bacon stepped to the microphone. "I lied," he began. "I lied to veterans, to families, to this nation. I let power buy my silence, and I helped bury a bill that would have saved lives." Gasp. "I came here today, not to defend myself, but to surrender my seat. I resign. Effective now." Chaos. Reporters screamed questions. One senator wept openly. A man in uniform threw his cap to the ground in fury. And through it all, Traoré sat, unmoving. Until Bacon looked directly at him and said, "Thank you for reminding this country what dignity looks like." Then he stepped down and disappeared from sight. The confession detonated like a bomb. By nightfall, 2 more GOP members resigned. One fled the country. Another issued a tearful apology on national television, confessing to willful neglect of truth. The nation held its breath. Capitol Hill trembled under the weight of long-buried secrets. Veterans marched side by side with high school students. Gold Star families chained themselves peacefully to government buildings. And at the center of it all, Helen Garner. She appeared again, briefly, this time holding not her son's photo, but the letter Don Bacon had written before stepping down. She read it aloud on TV. "You were right, Helen. He didn't deserve to be lost like that. None of them did. I hope one day you can forgive the coward I became." Helen didn't cry this time. She just said, "I don't want vengeance. I want this never to happen again." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Meanwhile, Traoré, now an overnight icon in American media, was asked if he'd like to meet the president. He declined gently. "I didn't come for politics," he said. "I came for a mother." And that made America pause. For once, someone came not to gain but to grieve with them. 3 days later, a special memorial was held at Arlington National Cemetery, not for a president, not for a general, but for Staff Sergeant Marcus Garner, Helen's son. The president, vice president, several senators, and Ibrahim Traoré stood shoulder to shoulder. No one spoke for the first 5 minutes, just silence. Flags at half-mast, bugles playing in the wind. Then Helen stepped forward. She placed her son's photo on the podium. She opened a small notebook, one he used to write poems in during deployment. Her voice broke as she read, "They said fight for a flag. I said I'd fight for my mom. They said die for glory. I just wanted to come home." The cemetery fell utterly silent. Then a single tear rolled down Traoré's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. The camera caught it, and within seconds, that single tear became the image of the decade. Millions of viewers across America broke. Teens, veterans, mothers, even hardened journalists wept openly live on air. "One tear, one truth," a headline read. The country wasn't divided in that moment. It was mourning together, and something began to heal. A week after the Arlington Memorial, Helen Garner received an envelope postmarked from Detroit, Michigan. Inside was a handwritten letter from a boy named Landon, age 10. His father, a Marine, had died 2 years earlier in Afghanistan. The letter read, "Dear Miss Garner, my daddy died too. I saw you on TV. When you cried, I cried. When you read your son's poem, I read mine. Thank you for saying the truth. I want to be a soldier like my dad. But I want a country that doesn't lie. If I grow up and help people, it's because of you. Love, Landon." Helen folded the letter and held it to her heart. Then she did something unexpected. She took Landon's letter to Capitol Hill. With cameras watching, she placed it on the desk where Don Bacon once sat. She looked straight into the camera and said, "If the people who sit here won't change for us, maybe they'll change for him." The video went viral again, and quietly, Ibrahim Traoré reposted it on his official account with just 3 words. "Let this stay." And it did. It stayed in the heart of a nation now wide awake. Congress passed the Veterans Integrity Act 3 weeks later, unanimously. It was the first time in over 15 years that both parties stood in agreement for a veterans bill. Full benefits restored, oversight restructured, and all prior lobbying affiliations tied to the scandal banned permanently. At the signing ceremony, Helen was asked to speak again. This time she brought Landon with her. The boy stood nervously at the podium until Helen leaned down and whispered, "Just be you." So he did. "Thank you for helping the moms and dads who help us. My dad would be happy, and I hope no kid ever has to cry like I did." Then he looked around the chamber and asked, "Can we not lie anymore?" Some laughed nervously, but many, even hardened senators, lowered their heads in shame. The camera panned to Traoré, who had quietly returned to D.C. for the ceremony. He placed a single hand over his chest. His message needed no words. Later, Helen whispered to him, "Thank you for standing when others sat down." He simply replied, "Truth stands tallest when silence is loudest." The nation didn't just applaud, it felt something it hadn't felt in years. Hope. Months passed. The rage cooled, but the memory didn't fade. Every Veterans Day, schools now recite Staff Sergeant Marcus Garner's poem alongside the national anthem. Landon, now a youth speaker, travels from state to state with Helen telling people, truth can save more than bullets ever will. Don Bacon? He was never seen on camera again, but it was reported he now volunteers at a small hospice for wounded veterans in Nebraska. No cameras, no fanfare. And Ibrahim Traoré? He became a global symbol of integrity, not for what he said, but for how he listened. 1 year after the scandal, a bronze statue was unveiled at Arlington, not of a general or a president, but of a mother holding a folded flag. Beneath it, the inscription read, "She stood, so we remembered." And every year, people weep there, silently, respectfully, honestly. Because in the end, it wasn't a rally or a headline that reshaped the nation. It was a mother's cry, a soldier's poem, a boy's letter, and one sentence that told the truth. If you cried, if you felt something shift inside you, this story wasn't just for your ears. It was for your heart. Like this video, if you believe the truth still matters. Subscribe for more soul-shaking real-life stories that the media forgets but the heart remembers. Comment below. What part of this story broke you? Tell us. Would you have stood up like Traoré? Would you have marched with Helen? This channel isn't just about watching. It's about remembering. Together, let's keep this truth alive.